This is ACOFAE. Laura Marie and Jessica Marie proudly present A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, a podcast. Fair warning, everything the hosts say is explicit, full of spoilers and adult content and shall not be used against them. They have opinions. Let's try not to drag anyone for expressing themselves and just have fun for an hour. We all deserve it.
This episode does not contain any spoilers outside of the Medusa myth that we know. There are conversations surrounding sexual assault.
Everybody, and welcome to A Court of Fandoms and Exploration, your weekly deep dive into the fantasy, literature, and fandoms that we love. I'm Laura Marie.
And I'm Jessica Marie.
And today we are welcoming a very special guest and our new friend, Nataly Gruender,
who is the author of her debut novel, Medusa, which is out now. Welcome, Nataly.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Nataly Gruender. I am the debut author of Medusa, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for taking the time and joining us.
We really appreciate it, and we are so excited. We are so excited to talk about this book. I really enjoyed this. Jess, did you really love this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like anybody who loves Greek mythology, whether it was like a hyper-fixation of yours like when growing up, or just like appreciates just good storytelling, like this is that story. Like everybody, and if you didn't have a background of Medusa, this is a great place to start and begin and explore and start your new hyperfixation. How did this story come to be? Like, what was the development? I mean, we saw from with a little bit of research ahead of this episode that it was part of your senior thesis. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was my senior undergrad thesis for creative writing in college. I started it just as a project where I was like, okay, I have a minor in classics and one subject that's always interested in me is Medusa. And so for my creative writing thesis, I was like, let me write her story. Let me see, what I think it would look like. And because a lot of what I was seeing when I was researching like topics in Greek mythology is that you would get like glimpses of her throughout other people's stories. You would see her beheaded in Perseus's hand, like as he goes around and uses her for his own purposes. You would see her kind of like offhandedly mentioned as like a demon in someone else's story as she's like, turning people to stone, but then that's about it. You don't really see like who she is as a person. What was she like before, Poseidon takes advantage of her and then she's transformed by Athena. Like who was she before that? And there's different versions of her through mythology that you can kind of like see, like either she's born as a monster or she becomes this monster, or all of her sisters are monsters. Like they're all three of them are Gorgons. And so all those different stories really like interested me in seeing like, okay, but what's the through line? Like, how did she go from, being born in this family of like immortal gods as the only mortal child and then get to the end, her head's cut off, like what happens after? And so that's what the basis of my thesis was trying to figure out, who was she in the middle of all of this? Like point A to point B, like what happened? Because there's so much stuff that you don't get to see. And so, yeah, it started as my thesis, and then it kind of just grew and grew and grew from there.
Did you always have a love of Greek mythology, or was this just something that you were like, you know what, I have heard a lot about it, I really just kind of want to dig deep?
No, I was definitely a huge Greek mythology fan ever since I was a kid. I read Percy Jackson as it was coming out, like every single book, all those spin-off series, I was there for it. I had that book that like every child who was interested in mythology had, the like pretty gold cover, that one. I was always reading those. I was always definitely interested in mythology. And so I took Latin as my my language in college. I don't know why I didn't take Greek. That would have made more sense. But I was like, Latin is here, sure. And so that's actually how I got into my classics minor. But definitely have been a big mythology fan my whole life. And it was such a fun project to get to do for my thesis, to look into Medusa, because it was just like so fun. They're like, yeah, this is your work. You're doing a project. I'm like, yeah, but it's also like I just get to spend time reading myths. So it doesn't feel like work at all.
Where was that shift where you were like, I still have so much to say beyond what I've, had this thesis, had this assignment. Like her story needs to be told in this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I actually got an agent out of college from that thesis because my advisor for my college thesis had an agent, and she sent my manuscript to her and was like, "Are you interested in this?" And she said yes. And so I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "Okay, but I need you to finish it." And I was like, "Okay." I had like 25,000 words or something for the thesis, and by the end of it, I was at like 100,000. So I was like, "Okay, yeah."
Oh, it's not done yet. Oh, now it's got to still go.
When it was the thesis, I was like, I think I'm like a third through. No, it was a quarter. I had a lot to say. And it just kept building and building. And it was just so fun, like getting to, explore all these things that I was interested in and how to like piece it together. Because I think that's part of what I really love about Greek mythology is like seeing like characters you're interested in other stories, and like seeing the cross hatching of all of these different myths and how they're all connected to each other. And so you're showing up in Dionysus' story and you're like, oh wait, I know all these people that he's talking to. That was super fun for me. And so that kind of just was what the book turned into. It's just people talking.
And that's one of the things that Dionysus says in like his part of the story is like, what's happening, the facts, but they're going to, the people that you have interacted with in this moment, they're going to be telling an entirely different story. And those are the stories that so many of us are familiar with. So you get to see these different angles and you're like, okay, it's all about perception, really.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's what I really loved about myth too, is because it was so fluid. The fact that like everything, like even Medusa, she had so many different origin stories I could have gone with. And this was just the one that felt the most right to me, the most right for this story. But the fact that there's so much fluidity and there's like Dionysus was saying, like, there's like people across the world will hear the story, but maybe they didn't hear like the version that you would have told, or maybe they heard a version that someone else is the hero of that story. Obviously, we know who it is, but he's not the hero in this story.
Talk to us about your writing style. I am so curious. So this started off, creative writing, but still in like an academic kind of like mindset. How did you like kind of transfer this like academic writing mindset into it's a novel. You've got it right here. Like, how did you transfer that? Did you like plan everything out? Did you have like a big like plot board? Is it like physical? Do you need paper? All of these things. I'm so interested.
Yeah, so the start of it was actually a little notebook that I had of all of these different like references that I wanted to look into for like the origin stories of the myth, like Ovid, Hesiod, Apollodorus, all of those things of like, okay, I want to go look and see like how she's mentioned, what descriptors are around her, like how were they speaking about her in like the original myths. And then I was looking further into like, there's this great book called the Medusa Reader, which is just a whole bunch of different essays that are talking about like how Medusa's been used in like modern stories, modern like kind of political spheres, stuff like that, of just all these different takes on her. And that was really fun to look into. And so it kind of started with definitely like basically a bibliography. And then it turned into a book of me being like, the first 25,000 words at least were just like, okay, I want to take, I think, the pivotal moment for her at the beginning, which is when she's raped by Poseidon. That was the first part that I wrote. And so that was like the first kind of inciting moment for me for writing it, of just like, okay, this is what I think is going to be like the most important thing for her to go through. So I'm going to see what happens there. And then I started building around it. Like I started writing the beginning after that and like building up to that moment. And I think that's when I got to like my cap for my thesis. And I was like, okay, we're cool. But then after I graduated and I was like, okay, now I have to finish the story. I had no like outline whatsoever. I like kind of had vague, like, okay, she needs to get like here and here and here so we can get to the end. Cause of course we know what the end is. But like, other than that, I was kind of just like, I think this is what happens. Like Dionysus was never even like a thought in my mind when I first started this project. I didn't even know he was going to be in the book. And then he became such a huge part of it. But I love him as a character so much and he was so fun to write. And I think that kind of ended up being my whole experience with finishing the book, was that I was like, okay, I think she needs to like get to this point, but on her way there, here's all these fun characters she gets to meet and here's like what she goes through during that time. And, you know, she's really struggling, obviously, as she goes through it. But then her meeting all these different people, I think, is what helps her grow so much. And it was definitely not planned, which is really, thinking back on it is crazy. But the way that it turned out, I really love the way that it turned out, because it feels very much like a natural odyssey for her. And I wasn't like trying to, confine her to the actual myth, because the whole point of this was for her to have her own voice telling a story, and for us to see like what could have happened. Because obviously a lot of this is my own personal imagination. But, I wanted to see like, okay, what if she meets a nymph and she likes her a lot? So I got to do that, and that was great.
Were there any parts of Medusa's like traditional, I say like, traditional, like myth that you were just like, you know what? No, I am aware of that, and I do not want that in my story. Anything like that, or nah?
I mean, when I look back on it, I'm kind of thinking that she doesn't really turn that many people to stone. She turns it's like a couple people. It's a good amount. It's enough for people to be like, I'm scared of this. But she's not like kind of the terrifying turning hordes of men into stone, like terrifying the kings and all the worlds, and everyone's terrified of her. It wasn't really like that. And I think that really did end up helping the way that I characterized her, because that wasn't her goal ever. It was just her internalizing and figuring it out on her own, and then everyone in the story around her kind of like making their own assumptions. But I definitely think, like, based on how she's perceived in other stories, I didn't lean into that monstrous kind of expectation as much, even though the whole book is like, is she a monster? Does she want to be? Does she have to be? Like, that's the whole discussion. And so even as I was like facing it down, it was like, that wasn't going to be the main point. It wasn't going to be her like doing all these bad things and being like, should I have done that? That was never like my idea. I wanted her relationships to be at the forefront, not kind of the idea, obviously, of the original story. So, she's just a monster. She needs to be beheaded. And that's it. So I think that's the only thing. Because everything else, I feel like I kept in, because that was what the notebook was for. I was like, I'm going to include everything, because I know the classics will be looking at this.
This is to be true. This is my truth of Medusa, because that it is that origin story, and it's who she becomes. And it's that, I think, that internal conflict when we all do something that, you're not sure, like, just those internal questions that you have of yourself if you do something that you didn't necessarily intend to do. And of course, she has those, those conflicts and that doubt. And like you were saying, and to what Dionysus was even saying, where he's like, stories are going to be written by these other people, but you told her truth here. Mm-hmm. And you handled it all so delicately.
Yeah.
It's really lovely. Here's my question for you. Do you have sisters?
I don't. I am an only child.
Hey, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Okay.
Laura's going to get into, because she's like, there's somebody else who gets it.
People are going to probably ask her this, and I'm going to have to be like, no, I'm a fraud. I'm so sorry.
So okay, this is so great then. All right. So then I, again, only child, love the idea of sisters, like the sister bond, all of that. And I also really love the idea of the sisters coming together and having a strong bond, and the mother is not a part of it. Like, just like separate from it, and they are together. I love that. Let me tell you, I assumed you had sisters, but you know what happens when you assume. That's what happened to me. You wrote this sister bond and the journey that these sisters went on so beautifully. We start, talking about your book a bit, we start off with our sisters and, we don't get along. We are tasked to do something. We journey, we part, we come back together, and then we find peace together. Mm-hmm. And how gorgeous, how stunning. How did you do that without real world first-hand sources? Material? That's so wonderful. I just want to say thank you. This is so great. I loved reading the sister bond, but was that a challenge? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it definitely was a challenge because I did feel like an imposter coming in and trying to write this story where it's definitely like, okay, the three Gorgons, like they are known for being sisters. Like I have to make sure it's believable and it comes across the way that I wanted it to come across. And I feel like definitely prior reading of just books with sisters in them written well helped me a lot, just to be like, okay, I know that like nothing is like peachy keen immediately out of the gate. Like we're gonna have spats, we're gonna have fights, we're not gonna get along, and then like we're gonna grow up, we're gonna, personal growth, maybe we come back, maybe it's better. But I feel like the story also really lended a hand to me because of the fact that Medusa was already kind of an outset in her family when she's born. She's immortal, the rest of her family is immortal. Like it was very kind of easy for me to be like, okay, so her other two sisters are going to pick on her because she is easy, like the easy pickings. So that was kind of like, okay, I know that this is probably how sisters act. I know that like, they're younger, they're the youngest in their family, like overall. They need to have like some sort of power for themselves. But even though they're all like supposed to be the three, like the stress that their family puts on the three, obviously that's going to cause cracks anyway, because that's so much pressure for them having only been alive for so long amongst, people who are thousands of years old. And so that definitely helped me as I was like working through like, okay, what are sisters like when they're younger? They're 14-year-old girls. What's going on? So that definitely helped me. And then when they were older and, splitting off and Medusa was like, I'm going to go on my own. Like that definitely is part of like my journey, even from my like parents of just like, I want to be independent. I want to like see what I can do on my own by myself. And I was like, okay, that's very fitting for her. But then the journey that Steno and Euryale take of, realizing their mistakes, realizing like, oh no, we really shouldn't have been doing that. But then Medusa also realizing like, they could have been there for me, but I pushed them away. Like it was all three of them having this, come to the goddess realization of, okay, I need to like, work through these things, and we do like do better together, but they don't know why. And so coming back and finding out why, that was, I think, part of the mindset that I was going through. Is I'm a very big believer in found family and chosen family. And I think that is what I base them on. When they come back together, is definitely like, it's not for just blood. It's not just because, they have the same parents. It's because they want to be together. Like they want each of them to be with each other in order to make their lives better, because they believe it will help. And so that definitely helped me, because I have friends who I consider like as close as family. And so seeing how we've come together, and like it takes a while, like we're not going to meet when we're young, we're going to meet when we're older, and we've already had these experiences, and we have to kind of, combine everything that we've gone through as people to like build this relationship. And I think that's what really helps them when they're older, come back together and say like, okay, let's do this together. Do you agree to do this together? And they're like, yeah, okay. So I think that definitely helps a lot. I'm glad it came off like I have sisters. Yeah, it was just a really fun kind of challenge for me, because I wanted it to come off, not as someone who didn't have any sisters and was like, this is what I think it's like. So I'm glad it didn't, because they're very important to me. So
there's something to be said about when you intentionally choose the people that you have in your life, because it's
right.
not an obligatory, it's not this obligatory relationship. And I feel like those are, friendships and familial relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell when you're like, oh, I'm here for family dinner, I'm here for Thanksgiving dinner, just because, or because you genuinely want to be there.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about Athena. Athena is throughout this book, she is meddling, she's doing things, she is cursing people, she is getting I would say like read the riot act at the end of this, which was glorious. Oh my gosh, just absolutely fantastic. The idea of like confronting the like female authority in your life after like all of this. Oh my God, I was just like, yeah, the whole way. tell me about how you created this version of Athena. And I mean, she's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Athena is awesome. But here you humanized her a bit. We get a little bit of kind of thoughts that she has, and also because we read this way, and we also read it through the audio, and the narrator is really lovely with Athena. It's a great raspy voice, and it is just fantastic. So tell me about Athena here.
Yeah. So Athena was in the first scene that I wrote, which is the assault scene, because she comes in at the end of it, and, you know, Medusa asks her, "Where were you?" And so that was kind of the first introduction that we get to Athena, is that, you know, she's this all-powerful goddess, but, you know, she was in the background while this was happening to someone that she's supposed to care about. So that was kind of her first introduction, which is obviously very complicated. And so that's what I felt like Athena's character was the whole time. She's very complicated. She's very cool. She's the goddess of wisdom. She's the goddess of, like, war planning and things. But she's also kind of a dick, because she cares a lot about how people perceive her and, like, her reputation and everything. And so she will do anything, and she will cut down the people that care about her in order to maintain, like, what she thinks needs to be, like, the way that, like, humans picture her. And so I think that kind of pettiness of a god really does humanize her. And I really wanted to bring out that part of Athena, because that was what always kind of really enraged me about Medusa's story, is that she is raped by Poseidon, and then Athena punishes her because she can't punish Poseidon. And it's like, okay, sure, that makes sense in the god mind. But so that kind of was how I was thinking about Athena the entire time. And I did want her to come off as, like, you know, her imposing, very impressive kind of figure. Medusa is, you know, enraptured by her at the beginning of the story before she's raped. And so it's like she looks up to her so much as this, like, figure of, like, okay, she's taking me under her wing. She sees something in me. I'm so, like, happy to have this figure that is, like, seeing me as something worthy. And then all of a sudden she's betrayed, and now she has to, like, refigure everything that she knows about Athena as we're going through the story. And you're seeing more and more about how Athena, you know, intervenes in human lives just to, like, kind of get what she wants. It's never, like, for the better of them. It's for the better of her. And, like, if it comes out that they do well in the meantime, she's fine with it. But she was a really interesting character to write. And definitely the last scene with her and Medusa when they're talking at the end was the hardest scene to write for me. I had to kind of redo it a couple times. Yeah.
Really?
I was really struggling with this woman who's been assaulted, has been raped, has been, like, what is the word? Defiled in, like, every way possible. And then she's defiled once again by someone who cared, like, who was supposed to be protecting her. And she has to come back to this person after she has finally been, like, for like the last time, head cut off. Like, she is, like, fully, her body is no longer her own to the final moment. And she has to, like, come back to the person who basically started this for her and have this, like, heart-to-heart chat. How does Medusa do that? How does she come back to Athena and see anyone but, like, another perpetrator? And so Athena having to own up to what she's done, I think was going to be very difficult for her, because obviously she doesn't see it that way. Because Medusa started as a mortal and then became this monster. And so once she became this monster, she became something worthy of Athena's attention almost. She wants her on the shield. She wants to be able to use that power that she gave her for herself. But she can't just take it, because that was never going to be a good ending to the story for me, because it was just another person using Medusa for their own means. So having that heart-to-heart between them was so difficult, because I was like, okay, she has to come to the realization that she is also implicit in this, even though she thought she was helping, because she thought she was giving Medusa, like, a power to be able to, like, avoid future interactions like the one she just had with Poseidon. But the way that she did it was not like, I'm helping you. It was I'm helping myself. And so that kind of, I feel like that interaction was definitely, like, a bigger picture talk about, you know, women against women violence, women not believing other women, that whole, you know, overarching idea of, like, we are really struggling against each other when we need to be struggling, like, outside forces. And so those two having that talk, I think really needed to be impactful for me, of just, okay, she's not just getting away with it because she's a goddess. She has to own up to what she's done to Medusa, and Medusa gets to have her voice in it, gets to have her say in how the story ends. And so that, I'm happy with how it turned out, but it was such a struggle to write. Because I was like, okay, there's so much that needs to happen here for me to be able to be like, okay, we're good.
And hearing you say that, it's like, yeah. I mean, I was just like so hyped for it, but like, yeah, it is very complicated, and really lovely too. And also just like the opportunity to really dress down somebody is you know, like
satisfying. It was like,
yeah.
Okay, here she goes.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, all right, excellent. I think surprising nobody, maybe somebody, who knows. There's not a lot of men here. Great. We love that. Who needs them? They don't do anything except the worst things. Yeah. So tell us what the men here. I mean, like, they're important, I guess. But in this world of like women and family and really bonding and understanding yourself and each other and your place in the world and how you're going to perceive, these men come in and they're just like, you know, her dad is like not really helpful. And then we have Perseus, like the what was it like kind of getting in that headspace, coming from this lovely headspace of like family, women, sisterhood?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was like adamant about when I started the story was that I did not want a male perspective as the point of view. I did not want to write from a male perspective. So every single perspective, even when it switches away from Medusa, is from a woman's point of view, even if this, like, the scene that we're going through is about a man. So any scene with Perseus is like either through Athena or the Grey Eye. Any scene with the king, Polydectes, is from Danae's point of view. Any scene from about her dad trying to marry her off to some man is from her mom's point of view. And so that was really important to me, is just be like, okay, they can talk because we need to know what's going on, but they're not going to get like this, they're not going to control the narrative that we're getting. Because I was like, okay, obviously they are kind of like leading the charge against Medusa, so we need to see them at some point to know like what's coming for her. But I definitely think, especially like with Danae, when she's watching the scene go down of like how Polydectes and Perseus like decide and come to the point where he's like, okay, go get Medusa's head and bring it back to me. Ha ha ha, you will die kind of king thing. Danae's sitting on the side of it like, oh fuck. Can I swear? Sorry.
Yes, of course you can.
Please.
Of course you can.
She's sitting on the side like, oh, my stupid son. He's not listening to me. He's like 18, whatever. He's not listening to me anymore. Like we had a good thing going here. We could hold out for a little longer, but now he's got to ruin it because he's got to prove himself as a hero. You know, there's so many side stories going on that even though the male characters are driving the story, it's like, okay, but everyone around them is also paying attention, is also listening. Like the only man in it that I was like, okay, you can stick around for a while was Dionysus. And even then he was, you know, his own little world. He can stay. But everyone else, I was like, okay, I know I need to come and see Perseus. We need to like have an idea of, you know, what are his stakes in the story? Why is he, you know, trying to get after her? But we've already heard his story. We know what he's doing. We know why he's coming. So I was like, we'll get, you know, the highlights and then we'll go back to Medusa and we'll see what she's up to. So it was definitely like, I knew how I wanted to shape those scenes when we cut away from her and see what else is going on. And it was really fun for me to figure out, like, okay, who's going to be the one telling the story for them? Like, who's going to be the woman's voice in the background? It's like, okay, but like, this little boy, he's not it. So, yeah, that was my take on it, which I'm very happy with.
Yes, and it was needed too. Like, I think one thing that I found while reading this book is you're always waiting for the moments that we know about. You're like, everything is like a lead up to the part. And they're not great parts historically from what we know with Medusa. But again, you make it, we're like, I want to read it. It's beautiful. Here's the story being told. Here's the point of views that we're seeing it from. But you're like, okay, we made it through, you know, this situation. on to the next, and you're like
Mhm.
enjoying the story, but you're still waiting for the other shoe to drop for like the next thing you know with Medusa and what she's going
Right.
through, and you're just like, okay, we got that over that hurdle, and you just approach it with such grace.
Thank you. It was definitely, it felt like definitely like you've just like fallen over a waterfall and you're like, okay, we're floating, we're on a mountain, we're with Dionysus, we got some wine for a little while. Okay, cool. Oh no, the next waterfall's coming.
Yeah.
Okay, we see it. Okay, we're going over. And so it definitely felt like I was filling in the gaps, which was how the story like got built. But it was definitely like, I didn't want to over traumatize the story itself because we know how awful it already is. And that it just wasn't going to be, doom gloom the whole time. Because I wouldn't be able to get through a book like that. And even though I think Greek mythology does a really good job at kind of gilding over that on the outside, you look into these stories and they're full of violence, they're full of rape, they're full of betrayal, they're full of just all these horrible things. And then on the outside, we're like, ooh, nymphs, gods, goddesses, that's fun. It's like, no, look closer.
Do you like snakes?
Yes and no. I think they are very aesthetically interesting. If I know it's not gonna, bite me, I would hold one, but that's about it.
That's totally fair. It's a reaction. It's a reaction. I love how you have created the relationship between Medusa and her snakes, and how the moment she like touches her scalp and she feels like where they connect, and it's like 24 finger, like 2 finger length, like snakes. It's amazing. And the relationship that she has with them, and it goes from fear to kind of dismissal to acceptance, to love, to very deep love. And the snakes talk to Medusa, and it's a part of the acceptance where towards the end the snakes are saying like, no, it's us together. And I think that, and the concept of kind of like embracing a monstrosity, embracing that kind of aspect of yourself, because we have such beautiful conversations about like what it is to be a woman, what it is to be perceived, what it is to be different. And Medusa, through her relationship with her snakes, is this version that you've created. I have not experienced something like that, where you're actually like touching and talking to and having this like conversation with the snakes. And that was so interesting and so unique and so special and a little unexpected for me. I just didn't think it would go there, that it really stood out. So I did want to say, like, do you really like snakes? Because like, it was really sweet. Like, they're in her hands and they're just like, it was very lovely. So thank you for putting that in there.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like them so much, because they definitely became like one of my favorite things to write in the story. When I started out, they weren't really in like my original thesis, because it came up to the point where she becomes transformed and then it stopped. And so after that is when I really got into them. And I think like they really became like kind of their own side plot almost in Medusa's story of her, rejecting them at first, kind of being like wary of them, accepting them, and then really loving them by the end of it. Like that was her own kind of journey of acceptance. And it was like subconsciously accepting herself as she's gone through this journey. But the fact that the snakes became like such a huge part of it, I think, was because so much of Medusa's journey is just her by herself, going from place to place. She's like fighting internally, like, okay, this has just happened. Like, what do I do now? And so I wanted her to kind of have something, to bounce off of. And I was like, okay, the snakes are there. Are they just her, or are they kind of separated from her? And I think as the story goes, like, you can go in between that, because they are definitely like only aware of what she's aware of, but they are also snakes, so they kind of have a few more senses than she does. But they kind of grow with each other as they go, and it was just such a fun kind of like concept to work with of like, okay, how does she, treat them as they like become more comfortable with each other? The snakes don't like water. She remembers that. The snakes like will tell her when something's coming. The snakes know like in her memories, like what's happened to her. And so they get mad on her behalf. It was just like super fun to imagine what this kind of piece of you who is also like its own entity, like how would it interact with you? That was really fun to kind of conceptualize. And I kind of leaned into like, okay, I'm imagining these snakes as like bright green, kind of not real looking, but definitely got like the little tongue, the scales, everything like that. So I have not really had interactions with snakes enough to be like I am an expert, but these are fictional snakes, so I felt like I could do what I wanted.
I have a question. My question is that there are some really fantastic, well-known characters from mythology in this book. Mm-hmm. I don't have to name them all. We know what they are. Read the book if you don't. So I am wondering, were there ones where you're just like, yeah, you know what? I love that. I love this story. I love this character. In like, even
you took
if
my question, I have it written down when we were talking.
Yeah. Because like so we've got our three-headed dog. Like we have these wonderful like well-known characters where you just like, you know what? Yes, this is it. I love this.
Oh, absolutely. Cerberus was number one because I was like, okay, Echidna is her sister. Echidna is Cerberus's mom.
Like yeah.
He's gonna show up. I was like, this just makes sense. It works so well. He was definitely my number one because I love him in mythology. I think he's so fascinating. Just this ginormous three-headed dog that guards the underworld, and he can be plied away by honey cakes. Like, fascinating. Love it. Absolutely. I want one. Like, he was definitely my number one of I want him in this story. I want to see what he's like as a baby. I want to know how he grew up. Like, what's he doing? Like, what was he like? And so that was super fun for me to get to include him. He was definitely number one. I feel like by the time I got to it, Dionysus was just such an incredible character to write. I was so glad he showed up and was like, yeah, I'm here too. Because he, I think, would also have a very interesting story similar to this style of just his story is insane about how he journeys from, being birthed out of Zeus's thigh to becoming an Olympian god to all the stuff that he goes through. But I feel like I had an earlier version of Dionysus in this story where, not a lot of stuff has happened to him yet, but he's still a god. He's still kind of out of reach, but just enough where he's like, yeah, Medusa can stay on my mountain for a little while and we'll talk. So he ended up being really fun of just giving Medusa, an interaction with a god who isn't trying to use her for anything. That's her first kind of time where she's actually having a friend who's not just, needing her for a purpose, for a future purpose. So he was super fun. And I really enjoyed, messing with him, kind of playing with him as a god, his transformations, all the stuff that he can do, just kind of casually. That was really fun for me. But yeah, I think those two ended up being my favorite.
Well, and speaking of fun, and we take it back to the beginning, outside of the characters that you've added, or really brought into the story that we see more of, what was the most fun about this process of creating your debut novel?
I don't know. It's been such a long process is the thing, because I started it in college and then I had an agent out of college. I had to drop that agent, go back on submission, get a new agent, and then sell the book. So it's been it's been going on for so long that even though it came out yesterday and I people kept asking me, they're like, oh, how do you feel? And I'm like, I don't even know. It's been out of my hands for so long.
It's out.
Right. Yeah, people can see it. My friends keep sending me pictures of it in bookstore, window fronts. And I'm like, that's crazy. That's wild. But it's just been seeing all the people, even before it published, seeing everyone at my publisher Hachette, my editor will write to me and be like, someone else in the sales team read it and they love it, or someone else in marketing wants to send you a little review of how they liked it and stuff like that. And that's been so crazy to me because it's like been mine for so long. But seeing everyone read it has been like, even before it's come out, has been like such a like mind-blowing experience of like, oh, they actually they like it. People like it. It's good. Like, I know they were like, we want to publish your book. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. And they're like, we really like it. I'm like, really? So that has been like the most incredible experience of just seeing everyone reacting to it, and like something that I've been working on for so long. And really, I kept it really close to my chest for so long because I was like, okay, I know how the publishing industry is. I know what's going on. And I definitely felt like when I was writing it, I was like, okay, Greek mythology is like having its moment, but it's also still very niche. Like, we'll see if anyone wants to read it. And then everyone's like, no, we want it. We want to see it. I'm like, oh, thank God. Here, please take it.
Thank you so much for taking the time. This is your episode. Like, this is happy release week. The episode will be out on Monday. So it's going to be one of those less than a week that the book has been out. Where can we find you? We want to make sure that we have all of those socials in our show notes. You're going to be so annoyed with us tagging you consistently. It's your week. And then it continues to be evergreen content because Medusa's story never ends. Medusa
timeless.
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic. She's a classic.
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at Nataly Gruender, just first and last name. And then I'm on Twitter as well, at Nat_Gru, GRUE.
Perfect. Thank you again for taking the time. And as Nataly said, make sure you follow her on her socials. We'll make sure we have those in the show notes. And please feel free to follow us. We're also on Instagram, ACOFAE Podcast, and we're both on TikTok, ACOFAE Laura and ACOFAE Jessica. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.